Welcome, everyone. I'm Kellie Melle, Director of Education at the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts. And we welcome you to our special virtual lecture, Picturing Paris Between the Wars. We are recording this webinar. So when, after this is over, if you didn't catch something or you want to go back, you're welcome to revisit it. And this is a live webinar, but what that means is that attendees, you will be hearing and seeing everything, but we won't hear or see you. So you'll notice that there is a Q&A and a chat area down at the bottom. You're welcome to post a question whenever you think of something, or if you have a comment you would like to add, you're welcome to go ahead and add it in there. However, we probably won't get to that or interrupt until the very end, and then we'll take some time towards the end of the hour to take a look to see what you were thinking and see what your questions were and try to get to everybody if we can. And now I'd like to introduce you to Sarah Hall, Director of the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to see you with us tonight and have your virtual companionship for what I know is going to be a really terrific program. I always have a few announcements to make before I let go of the microphone. And tonight I'd like to take a moment to thank those of you to ask those of you who have joined us to please remember the museum as you plan your year-end giving. These past 18 months have been a challenge for the entire planet, but we've learned new things like how to bring you all together here online. We've continued presenting powerful exhibitions. We've done some fun new programs, including cooking classes paired with art explorations. Often it's hard to measure the exact impact of the work museums do. We can count the number of people that come through our doors. We can count the number of people in an online webinar like this, but our biggest impact is personal, and it's in the way we touch people's lives. Our donors have helped us keep our doors open for free for 90 years, and tonight that means our virtual doors are open. This is one of our many free educational offerings. One big accomplishment of this past year was bringing Kellie on as a full-time director of education, and she's always working on creative ways to increase the museum's impact in our region. And the last thing I'll add to this little plea is that over the past 18 months, we've also built up an impressive library of digital offerings, lectures, conversations, art projects for children, even those cooking classes I mentioned that expand on our collections and exhibitions. And you can find all of those on our YouTube channel. So we just have this wonderful new sort of library of things that you can dip into whenever you're in the mood to add a little art to your life. Which brings us back to tonight. Tonight's program provides a larger context for appreciating our current exhibition, The Secret Paris of the 1930s, Vintage Photographs by Bastille. And I want to first express my appreciation to the organizers of the exhibition, which is Art to Art Circulating Exhibitions. The photographs are all still copyright of the Bastille estate, and the works that are in the exhibition are from the collection of Michael Mattis and Judith Hochberg. I should note, Linda's going to show you a lot of images tonight, not all of which are in the exhibition. I do want to acknowledge that the Hagerstown presentation was generously supported by gifts from Mr. Howard S. Kaler, the Waltersdorf Family Donor Advised Fund at the Community Foundation of Washington County, SPD Fiduciary Partners of Raymond James, Conservate Inc., and Mr. Louis Kawaja. And now that that business is done, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing you to someone I have known since something like 1996 or 1997. We go back a ways. And I find that the longer that I work in museums, the more frequently people ask me about the path I took to get to where I am or the people who shaped my career. And I will tell you, Linda is one of the 3 or 4 people I mention every time. From Linda, I learned in the midst of one of the largest and most stressful exhibition projects that I've ever been involved with, that you need to have faith in the process of thoughtful work. You will get there in the end. You can't let stress get between you and your eventual goal. And I suspect you'll sense this thorough and yet completely erudite and witty working style as you listen to Linda tonight. It was really such a great time in my career to have worked with her. We met when she was curator of education at the Frick in Pittsburgh, and I was curatorial assistant. She had come to Pittsburgh from Boston, where she was curator of the Polaroid collection. Her education prior to that includes an MS in visual studies from MIT. She left the Frick far too soon for my taste, but she left to go become the executive director of a wonderful Pittsburgh nonprofit, the Silver Eye Center for Photography. And from there, she became the first curator of photography at the Carnegie Museum of Art. I know she enjoyed helping to develop their collection and had great satisfaction in curating important, ambitious exhibitions like Storyteller, the photographs of Dwayne Michaels in 2014. She's also a fabulous scholar of the history of photography and has taught as an adjunct for many years at Carnegie Mellon. We'll be the beneficiaries of that knowledge tonight. Finally, if you Google Linda, you'll also get to see examples of her own photography, which was featured in a 2018 exhibition at the Sheffield Museums. And just this past September, one of her photographic projects, which was being featured in an installation at the Harvard Art Museums, was the subject of a major article in the Boston Globe. It's so exciting for me to see this part of Linda's work getting attention. We are so fortunate to have her with us tonight, and I will now be quiet and let you all give a warm virtual welcome to Linda Benedict-Jones, someone that I'm very, very fond of and so happy to share with you.
Oh my gosh. I don't even know how to start after that. I've never had such a great introduction. Thank you so much. That's really, it's such a treat to be here. And I just have to tell everyone who's here with us that last night I watched a webinar that you did with your curator, Daniel Folco, that's his name. And it was so much fun and it was so inspiring that today I went back to my talk and I made it even longer, and that's your fault, not my fault.
Well, I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful extra few minutes. So we're gonna, Kelly and I are going to disappear and let you do your screen share and take over, but we will be here in the background, everyone, and we will help with the chat at the end.
Okay, great. Let me just get to this. Okay, can you see it?
Got it.
Okay, perfect. Great. Good. Okay, well, thank you again. Thank you so much for inviting me to give this talk about picturing Paris between the wars. I lived in Paris myself for 4 years in the 1970s. And so like anyone, of course, who has had that privilege of living in Paris, I have very powerful memories, very fond memories. And organizing this talk allowed me to, to kind of go strolling back through a lot of that, which was for me, I mean, almost 50 years ago. So quite a long time. I have huge admiration for the photographers who are in the, okay, just a second. Wait 1 second. Christopher, my husband, is telling me that I have to make a change here. Okay, thank you. Yes, good. Okay, good. Well, in spite of all those glowing things that Sarah had to say about me, you can see what a Luddite I am when it comes to doing presentations with Zoom. But anyway, hopefully we're off to a better point right now. So I was saying that I have great admiration for the three photographers that I'll be focusing on primarily tonight. And before we do that, I really kind of felt like I needed to give you just a sense of what photography was like before World War I, because it's interesting to note that before World War I, there was this phase, this period called pictorialism. And I have an example on the screen now by Alfred Stieglitz, who made this image called The Terminal in New York City in 1893. And what you notice about this is kind of the blurriness, the fuzziness, the impressionistic almost perspective here. And you will see that again in this image that his colleague Edward Steichen made of the Flatiron Building in New York. And this soft focus approach that was so popular at the end of the 1890s and into the beginning of World War I, changed dramatically after the war ended in 1918. And at that point, you saw expressions that were more like this, very much, a different kind of vantage point, sharp focus. What is this that we're even looking at? And that kind of mystery was part of what was attractive to, to the photographers, to the artists, and to the viewers. What's going on here? Where are we? That was the Berlin radio tower, and here by Alexander Rodchenko, you can see another kind of dramatic composition and lighting. Simple scene, a woman is carrying a child up a flight of steps, but there's something extremely dramatic about it because of that shifting of angles and that time of day that really makes a lot of impact with the shadow on those stairways. It looks far more dramatic than the theme would necessarily suggest. Man Ray was another artist who emerged after World War I. He even decided to make images not even using a camera. For example, here he was using the new 35mm film, took it in a dark room, made this kind of photogram with it. And he's an example of that kind of experimentation, big period of experimentation. Now, of course, at this point, there were lots of people who moved to Paris in the 1920s. I've mentioned Man Ray, but Ernest Hemingway and Josephine Baker, Picasso, Alexander Calder, John Cage, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Gertrude Stein, the list goes on, and of course includes 3 Hungarian photographers, 2 of whom we'll talk about tonight, Robert Capa, and then also André Kertész and Brassai. André Kertész is the first one we'll talk about. He was born at the end of the 19th century in 1894, served in World War I, but a few years after the war, he decided to move to Paris. And here you see an image that he took after he moved there in 1924. Kertész unfortunately didn't speak French. And so it was difficult for him to make a living, but he met a bilingual picture editor who needed some source material for the publications that he was working on. And so Kertész got a break and he was able to work on assignments for him. And something like this picture, the Café du Dôme in Paris, may well have been a response to one of those kinds of assignments. I include this self-portrait of Kertész because here you can see not only his creative way of photographing and doing a self-portrait that includes a shadow only, but also you can see the kind of camera that he used when he moved to Paris. It was a box camera, and he would have used it on a tripod, as most box cameras were. And yet, while he was in Paris, he became acquainted with a different kind of camera that we'll talk about in a second. This is one of his best known pictures. It's called Satiric Dancer. And it's kind of interesting that he encouraged this cabaret singer to just imitate the sculpture on the sofa. And so she did that, and she started to move on the sofa. He only made 2 exposures, but this was one of them, and a very successful one, I might say. It's really interesting to me because you've got, on one hand, up here, I think you can see my cursor, up here in the right-hand corner, there's a picture of a sculpture. And then you've got the sculpture on the other side of the frame, missing arms and legs, which are supplied conveniently by this woman who happens to be in the foreground and on the sofa, which I think is a pretty clever arrangement. So he was always experimenting with, different things. And here you can see another assignment that he would have been doing to make a portrait, make a picture of this Countess Carolie in Paris. And he was careful, he was inventive, he was exploring the notion of reflections. And this is certainly interesting, but for me, it becomes much more interesting when we look at it in comparison to the picture that we know Brassai made about 10 years later. And I'll probably say this more than once, but Brassai, a fellow Hungarian, moved to Paris. He did speak French, but he really didn't do photography. And it was Kertész who taught him photography, who encouraged him to do photography, and who also inspired him for certain things, such as you see in this image. This picture out of a window in Paris called Broken Plate in 1929, I think is rather interesting in a number of ways. It was probably also made with the box camera. You can see lots of detail, but it's kind of mashed up. And it's rather interesting to me. I mean, first of all, you've got that, you know, it's a broken window. So you've got this hole in the middle of the window, but then, you know, honestly, you would see the building through that hole, and you don't. And so now we know that Kertész has done something. He's darkened that hole in the darkroom to make it a little bit more dramatic. It's already plenty dramatic with that broken glass and so forth. But I love the way these chimneys are just stacked up along the left here. And the house, the way the houses, the buildings on this side are just, you know, kind of compacted. It's a pretty interesting view. This is one of Kertész's most famous images, and I want to show it to you because even though it doesn't have much to do with the, you know, street life of Paris between the wars, it's called La Fourchette, the fork, and it's pretty clear he would have used a large camera to make this, and you can see his kind of penchant for engaging composition. I mean, we know what it is. It's a bowl. It's a fork. The fork is leaning on the bowl, but Kertész invites us to see this in a very different way. He gives us a riddle. He gives us a kind of visual riddle of interrupted light, and we enjoy that. We like to be challenged by it. Now, when the Leica camera was initially, you know, put out on the market, Kertész was one of the first photographers to buy it, to use it, to celebrate it. And here you see, and you can kind of tell this by the dimensions. It's less of a, it's a more elongated rectangle than the box camera would have been. And so he's actually making a night view. A night view was difficult to do with the camera that he was using before, but this is really clever. His use of this backlighting, but then showing this lettering on the floor of this bistro in 1927. Well, I'll say more about this as we go on, but the Leica was a handheld camera. You didn't need a tripod to use it. It had a way of advancing the film. There was a roll of film that would hold 36 exposures. And so that was very different from a box camera where you'd have to put in one piece of film at a time. And this really allowed photographers to think about new ways of capturing things. One of the things that he was very much aligned with the surrealists, and when he lived in Paris from 1925 to 1936, he loved doing series of things. He did a very long series of chairs, for example, in the various public gardens in Paris. If you've ever been to Paris, you probably feel like you've sat on some of these chairs because the style hasn't really changed that much. But what's interesting, I think, is how he was inspired by those shadows and decided to take that kind of curiosity elsewhere. And here you can see him depicting 4 girls walking down a sidewalk in a very different way. He was shooting them from directly above, much like that very first picture I showed you of the Berlin radio tower, looking at things in a very different way. And obviously this picture would not have been easy to make with a box camera and a tripod. This is something where the photographer had to make a decision very quickly and be able to act on it. Another series that Cartier loved working on, and he did it not only in France, but in different places in Europe, in Mexico, and in the United States, was to take pictures of people who were reading. And this was one that he made in 1928 in the Jardin de Luxembourg. And it's just a delightful picture. The man who's sitting there looks like, you know, Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot, so he's kind of charming in that way. But even beyond that, there's something here that kind of works on us subliminally, and I want to point it out to you in case you miss it. The man is sitting here on these chairs, these wonderful chairs that have this kind of X, this kind of cross, and you see that repeated as the frame goes back. But then you also see this kind of understated by his feet, which are at the same angles as the footing on the chair, which I think is rather clever. This is Café du Rhum, winter morning, Paris, another woman reading a paper, warming herself in this cafe. And one of the things that I want to point out about the handheld Leica is that it was so quiet. If he had taken a tripod in there and that box camera, the woman would have been obviously very aware of him making a picture. But he was so quiet, the shutter on the Leica was very quiet. And so the photographer, and in this case, I'm fairly certain that Cartier could go in, make this picture, leave, and she wouldn't have known a thing. Delightful picture of a fair. They happened all over Paris. This is the cow stalls, 1928, probably one of the many neighborhood fairs. And there's just an irresistible humor here, I think, because the Frenchman, who really doesn't look much like a farmer, he's seated next to a cow, and well, that cow appears to be reading the newspaper over his shoulder. Again, this would have been a spontaneous moment that would have been done with the 35mm camera. This one is another beauty, formally just beautiful. You see a man with a hat sitting again in the Luxembourg Gardens, and I have to point out how delightful it is that you know, the boughs of the trees in the background and the curving benches and even the curve of his paper. These are the little details that an astute photographer will always pay attention to, and that would certainly be Cartier. This one is, I think, really a tour de force, because this was again a kind of neighborhood fair called the Fête Foraine. And here you see a balancing acrobat. Well, I can assure you I wouldn't climb up on a stack of rickety chairs like he's done here. And that alone makes this worth photographing. And Cartier would have been behind all of those people in the foreground. But what makes this such a remarkable image is not only the acrobat upside down on that stack of chairs, but the man watching him from the bridge above. Because here you have, in one split second, because we know the acrobat didn't stay there very long in that position, in a split second, you have this negative positive energy. You have the acrobat in white against a black background. You have the viewer from the bridge in black against a white background. And it just makes a beautiful balancing act, which underscores the point of the photograph in the first place. Here we have an image which I haven't put the title on the screen, and I have a feeling that, you know, most of you know where we are. We're not only in Paris, but what building, you know, can be so easily recognized as the Eiffel Tower. Cartier didn't want to give us the picture postcard version. He was more interested in the dynamic of the shadows and the highlights and the little people moving around in that space. And so it's really pretty clever of him to have chosen, you know, this view from that vantage point, again, on high perspective. He uses those people to act, you know, to interact with the shadow of the arc. And he also uses that pathway to act as a way to let us in, the members of the audience. Another one of my all-time favorites is this one, Du Bonnet. Du Bonnet is a drink. It's kind of a before dinner drink, usually. That's how I've drunk it anyway. This is another just marvelous image where you look at it and you think, oh, well, this is a nice street in Paris where they've got some, you know, some posters on the wall. And then you start to look at it a little bit more and you realize, you know, oh, there's some things here I want to drill down on. So the man in the top hat right there, you know, he's helping to advertise this. There's a man in a top hat in the poster drinking the Du Bonnet. There's a man in a top hat walking through the scene. There's a woman in a hat gazing in the opposite direction. And we also have, curiously, if you go closer, which you can't see in that enlarged view, on the bench, you have a poster for Georgette. So it's kind of masculine, feminine, and you have this man and this woman and this Du Bonnet, and there's almost a kind of rhythm to the way this works, which is really, really beautiful. Another late 1920s image by Cartier, a siesta in Paris. And it doesn't really matter how you enter this image. You can enter from the top, you can enter from the bottom. He's going to guide you through it because that's the placement of his camera. We can start with the sleeping man in the foreground, who will then take us up to the man in the background walking along, or we can enter the frame here and travel down here. It's a nice way that the photographer has kind of guided us through the image. And I think this might be the last one that I have of Cartier. At first, it seems like it's, you know, a fairly simple street scene in Paris, just outside of Paris in Meudon. It's actually a somewhat complex composition. It's lovely the way these are happening again on kind of two planes. You see at the top of this image, the steam train moving to the left. And then in the foreground, you see a man carrying a package moving to the right. And it's an opportune moment actually to have these kinds of movement in opposition that he was able to capture. It was another split-second moment. And it's a lovely contrast between this kind of traditional street, look at the building facades and so forth. And then you see this kind of encroaching modernity, I guess you could say, with that huffing train passing overhead. With this image, when I see this image, sometimes I have to ask myself, was that Cartier or was that Cartier-Bresson? Because what we have in this image is what has come to be known as the decisive moment. If this had been taken, say, 3 seconds later, it wouldn't be the same picture. And the decisive moment is something we'll talk about more when we get to Cartier-Bresson. It is worth noting in advance that André Cartier started using the Leica camera that enabled this kind of picture making. He started using it in 1928, 3 years before the man we'll see next, Henri Cartier-Bresson, who is the person who really popularized the use of the Leica camera. So let's see what we've got first here. Yeah, I love this quote because Cartier-Bresson is just massively important. He's probably regarded, almost certainly regarded as the most important French photographer. he's a lion in the history of photography. He's just unparalleled. His contributions are unparalleled. And yet he said about himself and about Brassai, whatever we have done, Kertész did first. That's a huge compliment, just a huge compliment. Wonderful, wonderful thing for the man to say. So CartierBresson is someone I've taught in my classes in the history of photography. I know his work really well, and yet I surprised myself when I was starting to put this talk together, because in fact, CartierBresson, most of his images, his best known images, are from all over the world, not just from Paris. CartierBresson was born into a very wealthy family, a textile family. And so he had the luxury of being what we call in French a flâneur, someone who could just, take his time, stroll through the streets, have a camera, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You'll just stroll through your streets. You don't have a job that you actually have to do. And so, so he was able to do that. And he was also able, because of his privileges, he was also able to travel well beyond France. He became a connoisseur of street life, no matter what continent he was in, no matter what country he was in. Here, one of his earliest pictures was this train station, and the two men, and I can't quite see it because my own picture is up in that corner, but you have this lovely V shape here, and then you have that emulated and on the right of the screen with those two men there. And it's just a beautiful formal moment. And yet again, how long did that moment last? Not long. So there are some pictures that I was able to find from Bresson's work in Paris. And this one is one that I think is quite curious, a very early one. Here's this statue strapped down on this kind of cart, moving through Paris. It looks like there could be a horse's leg behind it in the background there. And curiously, the statue seems to recognize that it is strapped down and doesn't seem to be in the least bit bothered by it. Behind the Gare Saint-Lazare is a picture that we have to pause and talk about for a second, because this is his best known image. This is the classic, and perhaps you can see why right away. There is a man who's jumping from a ladder over water. Bresson sees the man, he anticipates the motion, and he has his camera to his eye, taking the picture before the man's heel breaks the surface of the water. And we also have, let's see if I can, make this work. Yeah, I wanted to show you an enlargement, because the background plays into this too. You have a poster in the background of a dancer on that billboard, and both the poster and the man are reflected in the water. And all of the shapes in this image are sort of lyrical. You see, things bending and curving, and they support the whole ambiance of this really wonderful moment, this remarkable moment that he caught thanks to his own wonderful ability, but also thanks to the incredible attributes of the camera that he was using, which is true for this image as well. We've got this curving staircase. We've got this bike going down the street. As viewers of this image, we are able to go down this staircase and go around even the railing here you see, and then the curve of the street, and the man what if that bike had been over here, or what if it had been over here? It just would not have been the same image. It's really just quite delightful. This one is of a man with a cape, and here again it looks like a fairly simple image, but let's look at it and see why it sort of captivates. Why does it captivate our gaze? Well, a couple of things, I think. First of all, even when Cartier-Bresson made this picture in 1932, people weren't walking around in capes, to be honest. So it's kind of a bygone era that's being depicted here. But there's also a wonderful contrast between the very bare trees that are pointing upwards and the very cloaked man whose cape is pointing downwards. It's a lovely balance again. And as I mentioned, Cartier-Bresson was able to travel beyond France, and in 1937 he went to England, where he had studied for a year actually in college. His English was very good. He went to the coronation of King George VI, but instead of recording the king or any of the royal family, he instead focused on the people who were waiting there, watching the ceremony, watching the parade go by. And it's a delightful picture of the audience, the people who were there to celebrate. And of course, we can't possibly overlook this man who had probably been there a long time and fell asleep down below in this kind of bed of newspapers. Cartier-Bresson fought in World War II, fought for the French army in World War II, but was captured during the Battle of France, captured by the Germans, and he was in prison for more than 2 years. He tried to escape 3 times and was successful on his 3rd attempt. He made his way back to his family farm, where he dug up his Leica, and from the security of the farm, he worked to help the resistance as much as he could, and until the war ended. And when he got word that the Allied forces had entered Paris, he joined his friend Robert Capa. They made their way to Paris, and they photographed the liberation of Paris on the 25th of August, 1944. I love this picture because you can still see the fires burning, but I love the centrality of probably the most recognized building in the world, the Eiffel Tower. And it really says that, that if the Eiffel Tower is still standing, Paris is on its way back. Cartier-Bresson was assigned to do a documentary about French prisoners of war. And this is a picture of a Gestapo informer in Dessau, Germany in 1945, in a deportation camp that had been liberated. It was being used as a shelter when he took this picture, a shelter for displaced workers and prisoners and refugees. And the drama here is that the woman on the left had been trying to hide in the crowd, but she was identified as a Gestapo informer by the woman on the right. And it's a moment, and again, I stress a moment, a split-second moment that Cartier-Bresson was able to capture with that camera. It's a moment of great intensity, kind of tempered by that very calm man, that Dutchman, who's sitting at the desk and witnessing this. He had himself just recently been liberated from a concentration camp. And I'll close out Cartier-Bresson with just a couple more here. These are some school children overlooking the Seine from the top of Notre Cathedral. And I just love the way that this picture sort of cascades from the couple to the children and here again that you can see that the photographer is making use of this kind of V shape And it's okay that these things work on us in a sort of subliminal way, but I just want to point out to you that this repetition of form, just helps our eyes to continue to go further and further and further into the image. And the last one from Bresson is this one, which is just a marvelous picture of a little boy carrying two very big bottles of wine on the streets of Paris, on Rue Mouffetard, a very well-known street near the Panthéon. And those bottles of wine are called magnums. It's a magnum. It's a liter and a half of wine. Very heavy, actually. It's amazingly hard for such a young boy to carry something like that. But a group of photographers got together in Paris after World War II and decided to form a picture agency, a photo agency, and they drank so many magnums at that meeting that they decided to call the group Magnum Photos. And Magnum Photos still exists today. The finest photojournalists in the history of the medium since World War II have been a part of it. You can Google it, you can see amazing reportage, and it's just an astonishing agency. The little boy didn't start it, but he's carrying the magnums that gave the organization its name. So now we're going to go to I wanted to give you a little bit of information about the camera because I've referenced it so much. Up in the upper left here, you can see Cartier-Bresson as a younger man photographing in the street, going around in his trench coat and his Leica, very small and pretty easy to hide compared to a tripod and a view camera. Obviously, the camera that you see in the lower left, that is actually his Leica camera. He didn't like the fact that it was gold and silver, and so he would paint those sections out black. Eventually, the company did create a full black body camera. And why would that be important? Well, if you're that kind of photographer and you don't want to be noticed and you don't want people to see you, then you don't want any light kind of shining off of the lens. So you would want a full black body camera. Cartier-Bresson was notoriously shy. He didn't like to be photographed, and so this is a rather rare a picture of him. I also just want to point out that, I guess you can see it here. Some of you may have, some of the older members of the audience right now may have used what was called a single lens reflex camera. I had a Pentax SLR when I lived in Paris in the 1970s. That's not what he's using. A Leica, you can see here's the lens and here's the viewfinder. And the reason that's important is that when he takes a picture, he's looking through this viewfinder. There's his viewfinder right there. He's just about to put it to his eye. He is looking through that. And when he snaps the picture, it goes directly through the lens to the film. That also would happen with my camera, my Pentax 35mm SLR camera, except that I looked right through the lens. And when I took the picture, a mirror had to snap out of the way. It went tuk, 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 tuk. And it made a tiny sound, a very small sound, but it made a sound. And if you were trying to not be noticed by the person you were photographing, then you wouldn't want that sound. And that's why most photojournalists would have gravitated to the Leica camera. I mentioned the decisive moment. It's Cartier-Bresson's own expression about the way he worked. This is the book that he published in 1950, The Decisive Moment, photographs by Henri Cartier-Bresson. The cover was designed by his friend, Henri Matisse. And the book, I can assure you, is impossible to find today. If you do find it, you need to have a stack of bills to pay for it. Here is a portrait that he made of Matisse in 1944, before France was liberated. And now we'll go to the man of the hour, I think, Brassai. That's his real name on the top of the screen there. I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce it. He decided that most people couldn't pronounce it, and so he changed it to being Brassai, which means a person from Brasso, his area of Hungary. And he moved to Paris in 1924, 1925, mid-1920s. Here you see him, a picture of him photographing with the tripod, with his camera on the tripod. And the reason it's important for me to point this out to you is that I've just been talking about the Leica and how Cartier used the Leica, and so did CartierBresson. And together they influenced thousands of young photographers, to millions really, to use the Leica camera or to use a 35mm camera. You didn't need to use a box camera on a tripod in the 1920s if you didn't want to, but Brassai wanted to. He wanted to. And so in this sense, there are parts of Brassai that are very modern, and there are parts of Brassai that harken back to the photography that I showed you examples of in the very beginning. Some of that misty photography, some of that foggy photography, some of that soft focus, the romantic scenes. And I think you'll see this as we move ahead here. But before we do, I wanted to just point out to you that unlike Cartier and CartierBresson, who could go around with their little camera, and their little camera had a roll of film, and that roll of film had 36 exposures on it. So they could take 36 pictures, and then they could just take another little roll of film and put it in the camera and take another 36 pictures. In the case of Brassai, he needed to put in a sheet of glass into his camera for each picture he took. And he would carry these around in this bag that I've enlarged for you here to see. So this was his tripod, his camera, and now here's his film bag. And 24 glass plates was pretty heavy. And so he never took more than 24 pictures on any excursion. Now, I just was having such a good time getting ready for this talk that I decided to get out my book of Paris in the 30s. And I found this, this first paragraph, and I translated the first paragraph for you. And I'm going to read the translation while you get to test your own French as you read along there. This is Brassai writing. During my first Parisian years, starting in 1924, I led a nocturnal life, going to bed at dawn, getting up at sunset, walking from one end of the city to the other, from Montparnasse to Montmartre. And it was in being pushed by the desire to translate into images everything that amazed me in this nighttime Paris that I became a photographer, even though until that time I had neglected, even looked down on photography. This is how Paris by Night, published in 1933, was born. And if you ever get a chance to see this book, acquire this book, apparently the museum has copies in their gift shop. So I just can't encourage you enough to get one, because I'm sure that they have an English language version. It is just a fantastic book, and not only with pictures, but his own text that illustrates it. It's just wonderful. So what you see on the screen right now is a a picture of his first book, Paris de Nuit, that I just mentioned. Just like CartierBresson's book, The Decisive Moment, Paris de Nuit is extremely rare. It fetches huge prices at auction. It's unlikely that, I don't know, I've never even seen it. I've only seen photographs of it. If you have one, please let me see it. So we're going to start at looking at the pictures in the book, and we're going to look at some of the architectural scenes. He loved cobblestones. He loved the light that would be reflected off of these wet cobblestones at night. And here again, you know, I just can't stop emphasizing the things that the photographer's eye sees, this lovely curving street. Now they didn't lay the stones, but the photographers know where to put themselves to create a better appreciation for the work that was done to create that beautiful shape. The Arc de Triomphe, you know, one of the most classic monuments in the city, erected at the beginning of the 19th century to honor those who died in the French Revolution. So it had been there for over 100 years by the time Brassai got to Paris. There are 16 avenues that converge on the Arc de Triomphe, which is why it's called the star or l'étoile of the city. And, you know, usually what we see are the picture postcard views. It makes it look very regal and majestic and all of that. But that's not what you see here. Here it looks almost spooky, like, oh, I don't think I want to go there. And I certainly don't want to go on the top of that. And I know my husband is thinking, Linda, you left your lens on the top of the Arc de Triomphe. And that is true. I did in 1973. Very sad. But it's a kind of menacing portrayal of the Arc de Triomphe that he gives us here in this image. Paris from the Notre Dame Cathedral. In his later book, you know, the one that we'll talk about, Paris in the 30s, he describes how he had to bribe a guard to be able to go up there after the cathedral was closed. And the guard had never done that before. The guard was very nervous, but the guard didn't make very much money and could use the money. And so he accepted the money that Brassai offered him. It's just a wonderful nocturnal view of the city. He had to climb 378 steps to get that point of view. And imagine carrying that tripod, those glass plates, the camera all the way up there. And when Sarah and curator Daniel Folko were talking about this last night, Sarah mentioned how a friend of the museum had commented how it's like we have the gargoyle's perspective. And I thought that was just a wonderful reading of this image. We can see what the gargoyles see. Place de la Concorde. This is an ancient Egyptian obelisk. I didn't know this, I just looked it up. It was consecrated as an historic monument in 1936, really just about the time that Brassai made this image. And of course, we cannot fail to notice all the light, the fountains, the lights. Paris is known as the City of Light. It was the City of Light before Brassai started photographing it. It was the first electrically illuminated city in the world, and it works hard to maintain that reputation and does a very good job of it. Here we have the boulevard and at the Place de l'Opéra. So he went all over. Those electric lights were known as arc lamps. It says in my notes here. Installed in Paris in the 1870s. So it was actually not Brassai's idea to photograph at night. It was Kertész who persuaded him that he should try that. And he loaned him his camera and sent him out to photograph at night. What a lucky stroke. I think it's kind of interesting to compare these two by Brassai, because here you can see that he would return to the same scene that he thought had potential. The one on the left is a softer focus, more dreamy. The one on the right is still very beautiful, and here has the addition of freshly fallen snow, something that is always magical in Paris. And both of them have the Pont Neuf, a beautiful arched bridge in the background. The graceful branches falling over the water, the River Seine with that arched bridge, it's gorgeous. And of course, there are lots of arches in Paris, even in the metro. And here in the hands of Brassai, he can even make a beautiful image of the metro. Now, with using his camera on a tripod, he would be able to make a long exposure, which would have been helpful to get any kind of information in this brickwork here at the top. Something that probably wouldn't have been possible with the 35mm camera at that time. Now we're getting to his neighborhood. Here we have Avenue de l'Observatoire, and I'm looking at the time and I realize that I have to pick up my pace here a little bit. But these are just very, very special pictures that he made in the neighborhood where he lived. He loved foggy nights. Lots of photographers know the charm of a foggy night. This particular image, I have to tell you, was so popular, so well known, that I found it when I was visiting that little village of Clermont-Ferrand in the center of France about 10 years ago. And I was strolling through the streets and I thought, oh my gosh, look, there's Brassai's. Wait a minute, that's a furniture store. That's a furniture store window. Yeah, that's Brassai. But look at that. It's actually not a photograph. It's a piece of furniture. And in fact, it's a light, it's a lamp. And what they've done is put light bulbs behind this car so that you could have this on your wall in your living room or elsewhere and use that as your light. I thought that was pretty amazing. It shows to the extent to which his work has been adopted by the people of France, really. So here's a close-up of Brassai, and I couldn't resist including this one because, of course, we see his eye here so well illuminated. And Henry Miller, the famous author, dubbed him the Eye of Paris, and that's a title that has kind of stayed with him. Now we're going to go into the part of Paris where some of his most famous images were made, near La Bastille. This is a cafe in Rue de Lappe. And one of the things that Brassai used to say about photographing is that he liked black and white photography. They all used black and white at that time. And he believed that nighttime suggested things that were, we could bring something to it ourselves as the audience. And the Rue de Lappe is a popular area full of cafes, music halls, restaurants, and now we're in the 1930s, of course. But when I lived in Paris in the 1970s, I had friends who lived on Rue de Lappe, and I went there often to restaurants but it wasn't quite as active as it was in the 1930s. But it became a neighborhood that even to this day, it's a sort of chic, urban thug, chic thug kind of neighborhood. Galleries are there now, but so are kind of some rowdy bars. But I have to share an anecdote from my husband, who was there for a conference, I think in the 1990s. And he and the man that he was with wanted to go to one of these cafes, and it was empty, virtually empty, and just a few tables occupied, I guess. And they were wearing sport coats, and so they were told, no, I'm afraid we're fully booked, no free tables tonight. And he said that he had the feeling that they were just too well dressed to be accepted into the club. Pretty amusing. Le Balahaut Dance Hall, also on Rue de Lappe, is a place where Edith Piaf would sing and visit a lot. Le Balahaut was so notorious that it was declared off limits to American soldiers in World War II, but you know, they were just there dancing, tangos, jazz, spirited waltzes apparently. And Edith Piaf used to visit there not only to sing, but she used to go there with her lover, the famous boxer Marcel Cerdan. And here we are at another one of the establishments on Rue de Lappe. There were a dozen of these dance halls in the 1930s. This is the Bal Musette des Quatre Saisons. And let's now remember the camera that Brassai was using. It's very important. Well, I'm not even sure. I want to take that back. Because to be honest, when I became acquainted with these photographs by Brassai, I didn't really want to know about the camera. I just wanted to know about this environment. I wanted to know about this era. I wanted to know about these people. And the camera wasn't actually the first thing on my mind, far from it, in fact. But now we know that these scenes were choreographed by Brassai, but in concert with the people who were photographed. You can't sneak up with a tripod and a camera, a view camera, and take a picture like this without people knowing that you're doing it. You would have needed the Leica to do. You could have done it with the Leica, but that's not what Brassai wanted to do. He wanted to stage these. He wanted to have the people be aware of it. And occasionally he would even have an assistant who would help to light it, because these were pretty dark environments. And even with the camera on a tripod, sometimes that, you know, that just wasn't enough. So they would use sometimes flash bulbs or flash powder, which could be kind of scary, actually, this flash powder. Apparently, someone called him, I think it was maybe Picasso even, who called him the terrorist because he used this flash powder. So when you look at these scenes, you can see that it's as much about acting as it is about posing. Here we have courtesans in a bar. Lovely picture. It really kind of reminds us of some of the Impressionist paintings, this happy, carefree ambiance of the cafe world. He also made many photographs of the gay and lesbian bars, and apparently the exhibition has some of them on display. So make sure you try to get to see the exhibition, buy the books. There are pictures of all of this in the books. We still have a few more. This is a woman who was called Madame Bijou or La Môme Bijou. He walked into this Bar de la Lune, the moon bar, one night in 1932, and here was this amazing woman sitting there. He didn't know anything about her, had never seen her. Apparently she had been famous. The people who were normal clientele of the bar, they knew her. This was 2 a.m. when he made this picture. He wrote in the book that she had more than a dozen necklaces, 2 rings on each finger. He said he felt like an entomologist discovering a rare insect. And she was rich, but she liked to read people's palms to give them their forecast, I guess. So he took 2 pictures of her that night. They're both in the book. He never saw her again. When the pictures were published, she, however, was not happy about it. And he never saw her, but she went to his publisher and demanded payment for the use of her image. And the publisher complied. Here you have a very unusual perspective behind the scenes at the Folies Bergère. He wrote, I'm going to read what he wrote in the book. One winter day in 1932, I got permission to take photographs backstage at the Folies Bergère. It was a rare privilege since the management had always forbidden anything that might impede the working of that vast pleasure machine, in which every step, every movement was planned and calculated. The combination of naked dancers, stagehands, beplumed showgirls, firemen, 18th century lords and ladies transforms the wings into a fantastic dream. And one of the things that I learned last night from listening to Sarah's discussion was that this woman right here, who's waiting for her turn to go on as a dancer, is not wasting any time. She's knitting, because the girls who were in the Folies Bergère, it's fair to say that they were doing this as a job, and they maybe weren't making that much money, and they needed to not waste time. Here's a prostitute at the angle of Rue de la Reynie and Rue Quincampoix. Rue Quincampoix is a famous street for prostitution in Paris, and it's a rather lovely scene, I think, that he has captured here, just with the shape and the silhouette of this young woman who was what they call a girl of the streets, a fille de la rue. Here's another image of a streetwalker, this time near the Place d'Italie. And again, I want to quote to something that he wrote in his book about the prostitutes that he photographed and those that he met. Their life stories had been the same for centuries. Unknown father, bastard child. They had known nothing of maternal or paternal affection. Thus the power their protectors had over them. They preferred being exploited, even brutalized, to enduring solitude. They all lived on hope. Every one of them dreamed of a different, a better life. Beneath their surface gaiety, these girls lived in perpetual anxiety. They were fearful of raids, of becoming sick, of every stranger. What if he turned out to be a sadist, kinky, a dangerous maniac, a Jack the Ripper? So it's quite interesting to see in that text of Brassai's that he had a real sympathy for the hookers on the streets of Paris. This is inside one of the brothels, Susie's, chez Susie. Brassai went to the streets so often that he was well known. People weren't afraid of him; they trusted him, and so he was invited in to make images inside of the brothels, like this one. These are introductions at Susie's. You can see Susie back here. She's actually holding up her hand to try to hide herself, I think, from the camera. You know, we just have to say that this kind of scene is fascinating to those of us who aren't a part of this world, who've never been into a whorehouse, who've never known anything about this other than what we've read, seen in films, talked about with maybe our friends. And today, of course, we hear way too often about human trafficking. Women, men, girls, boys are sold into prostitution here and around the world. And obviously, we should feel outrage about that and do something if we can to stop it. But what we cannot do, and what we really should not do, is direct our outrage at the photographer. Don't shoot the messenger. So I'm sharing this provocative image with you in this public talk. There are provocative images in the exhibition. There are images that Brassai made from inside the brothels. And I just want to show you, the first time I saw this picture was on the cover of his book, Brassai, Le Paris Secret des années 30. Paris, the secret Paris of the 30s is how that's translated. Sarah knows this story because I actually wrote about it when she was at the Frick. I wrote an object label for her exhibition, and I found that object label, and I just want to share what I said. The first time I saw this photograph, it was on the cover of the book, and the book was propped in a window display of a vegetable shop in my neighborhood in Paris. The book was surrounded by cauliflowers, cucumbers, tomatoes, celery, and other fresh foods. And as a young photographer, I was eager to buy this book. And I went in and talked to the shopkeeper, and she coyly replied, "Ah non, mademoiselle, c'est pour moi." It was her own personal copy from Brassai himself. Though I never met him, it was very special for me to learn that we lived in the same neighborhood. So Brassai made countless photographs of secretive, beautiful, sometimes scandalous Parisian nightlife activities. And his brilliance was in knowing that these images of gay bars and vagabonds and tarot card readers and prostitutes and sailors and pissoir and cafe culture and all of that, he knew that it would fascinate people in the 1930s, but he couldn't publish the book in the 1930s. He had to wait 40 years to do that. And then when the book came out, it fascinated people in the 1970s. And big surprise, it's still fascinating us today. I mean, I can assure you that if you get a chance to go see the exhibition at the Washington County Museum of Art, you will be completely mesmerized by it. Now, I can't resist sharing a few personal connections because all of this came flashing back to me as I was preparing the talk. I've already mentioned that I was a young photographer in Paris in 1973. And in June of 1976, I went to the south of France to these photography workshops, which were not very well known then in Arles, France. Now there, thousands of people attend them every year. And one afternoon when I was there was a discussion that I attended between André Kertész, who you see right here, and Robert Doisneau, another photographer of the streets of Paris. I had no trouble getting to the front of the group. There were probably only about 20 of us there for the discussion, which is now astonishing because these are two major figures in the history of the medium. I do recall how difficult it was for Kertész to speak because his French was very poor. By this time, he was already living in the United States, but his English was very poor too. So I think even his Hungarian was poor. So he was having a very hard time expressing himself. It was still a huge treat to be able to see him in person. Years later, and Sarah mentioned this in her introduction, I had a chance to work for Polaroid Corporation in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And before I actually started working there, some of the people at Polaroid knew Kertész. They invited him to use a Polaroid SX70 camera in his apartment in New York City. He was happy to do that. So Polaroid showered him with cameras and films. And he loved it because his eyesight was failing. He didn't have to do any kind of darkroom work because the amazing thing about the Polaroid camera is you take the picture and it kind of emerges from the camera. You look at it, you watch it develop in front of you. And so he did a whole series, just like he had done a whole series on reading and a whole series on chairs. He did a whole series, a huge, wonderful series called From My Window. And that was published, I think, in 1982. I went to work at Polaroid in 1983, and we did an exhibition of this work at Polaroid's gallery, the Clarence Kennedy Gallery, and I got a chance to meet him then. He came up, he was a very old man by this point, and this is a copy of a picture of my book, André Kertész, 60 Years of Photography, and you can see here that I was able to get his signature on the front page of my book. So that was quite quite a treat for me to be able to meet him. He was an old man and he still had very broken English. And also I wanted to just mention that I never had the courage, I wish I had, I'd never had the courage to try to find out where Brassailles lived near me in Paris. But the same year that I attended the workshop in Arles, I traveled to London to attend an exhibition of Brassailles' work at the Photographers Gallery in September of 1976. And I wasn't a paparazzi, so I didn't have the courage to take pictures at the opening either. But Brassailles, who you see seated in the middle here, now an old, these are the three old men. Brassailles met with Ansel Adams, who's on the right, and with Bill Brandt, who's on the left, he being really the best known British photographer at that time. The best known American landscape photographer at that time is Ansel Adams. And the three of them got together at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And it was really kind of a pretty triumphal moment for photography at that point. None of us really knew in 1976 how hugely important these three people would become. But Paul Joyce did. Paul Joyce rushed there to make that portrait, and good for him for doing that. So I'm going to continue my story here just quickly and then wrap up. I went back to Paris and contacted my friend Sheila to see, hey, you know, I just got to see the show in London of Brassailles' photographs. Why don't we go and check out where he made these photographs? Let's go walking around the streets like Rue Quincampoix. And so here we are. This is me on the right and Sheila on the left. The waiter took our picture. We're finishing a bowl of soupe à l'oignon. And we're going to go and walk around Rue du Lap and Rue Quincampoix and stroll, you know, around, maybe see the prostitutes and waiting for clients and see if we can strike up a conversation. I don't know. I was 26 at the time. So, you know, I was just thinking, hey, this would be, hey, let's do this. So it's probably about 1 o'clock in the morning now. And there we were, you know, some of the prostitutes were friendly, most weren't. I'm sure that we looked like those tourists who sometimes invade their space. But at one point, a police car turned onto the street, and all of the women, you know, rushed back into their buildings. They went undercover into their building entrances, and we kept strolling. And soon the police wagon stopped us. And I thought, oh boy, here we are. And they asked us to join them in the paddy wagon because they were worried about us. It was obvious that we were not, you know, kind of selling our wares, that we were not filles de la rue or streetwalkers. And so we got in the paddy wagon with them. And here they even allowed me to take a picture in the paddy wagon. And I've never printed this. Just yesterday, I thought, oh, this might be fun to toss into the talk. So here you see the police officers who stopped us, and here we are in this paddy wagon, and they're driving us to a metro stop that's not too far away, so that we can be on our way. And so it's a blurry memory, obviously, for me, but one that came back after looking at all of Brassailles' photographs. And in closing, I just wanted to very quickly go through here to show you that there are other people who photographed Paris. Eugène Atget made marvelous photographs of Paris, primarily before World War I. Ilse Bing, a German photographer, also did same kinds of interesting perspectives, whether it's along the river or from the Eiffel Tower. Robert Doisneau, who you saw talking with Cortège in that courtyard in Arles, he was just magnificent with catching wonderful moments on the street, like you see of this man, this gendarme walking down the sidewalk, or then this very famous picture of a kiss, which you've probably seen before. It's an incredibly famous picture. Has kind of a sad ending to it, in the sense that Doisneau had actually hired actors to kind of mingle and go along, and he was just going to be taking pictures of them, and he did, and this is them, but apparently after the picture was published, some people said, that's me, that's me, and you've destroyed my reputation by publishing this photograph. And so they sued Doisneau for taking this picture, and well, he won in court, but apparently it left a very bad taste in his mouth for the rest of his life. And I'll end with Bruno Ruquillard, who is a photographer, a Parisian photographer today at Silver Eye Center for Photography. About 15 years ago, we did an exhibition called Paris sur Seine, Paris on the Seine. And I show these to you primarily to show you that just imagine how hard it must be to make pictures in Paris today where you don't look like you're just trying to copy Kertész or Brassai or CartierBresson. It's very, very hard. And I think that that Bruno Ruquillard has succeeded magically, really, with doing that. And of course, just like Brassai, Bruno also couldn't resist freshly fallen snow. So I know that I've gone over my time. I apologize for that. We'll close with this image of Brassai stairs in Montmartre, just a magnificent picture here. This is probably Brassai going home. You know, he kind of woke up at sunset, worked all night, and then went home at dawn. And I think that that's probably when this picture was taken. If you look over my shoulders, you can see that I have a large poster of this image. I think it's really one of his best. So that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for being here. And sorry, Kelly, I warned you that I would go over.
I don't think anybody's angry with you. I was just going to see if there were any questions. I don't see any down in the chat right now. But, you know, if anybody has anything they wanted to add or ask, you can kind of go ahead and do that now.
Well, I wanted to, while you're waiting for that, I just wanted to say hello. I have some friends who are with us tonight. I have at least 2 friends from Massachusetts, one in Cambridge and one in Northampton. I have several friends from Pennsylvania, around Pittsburgh, and even some people from Quebec. And Bruno Ruquillard, who's the photographer that I showed last, he wanted to be with us tonight, but it's 2 o'clock in the morning in France, and so he'll watch it later.
Wonderful. It's a good thing for the record button, isn't it?
Oh, that's right.
Thank you so much. We're getting great comments coming in the chat. People saying what a wonderful talk it was, and people who will be looking to share the recording. We will eventually get the recording on our YouTube page. The museum has a YouTube channel. In the meantime, you'll be able to find it. We live streamed on Facebook. You'll be able to find it there. It'll get buried by other things, but it will still be there. But what we put on YouTube will be a little more polished and edited at some point. Everybody's saying beautiful images, great talk. All of your fans are chiming in now, Linda. So there is one thing in the queue. There's a Q&A box here. Yeah, just another compliment for you in the Q&A box. So that's terrific. I knew that you would just dazzle everyone, Linda. So really nice to have you here.
Well, it was such a pleasure. What did I miss? I'm sure you were thinking, oh, she should have.
No, I don't think you missed anything. It took us, it was a wonderful sort of time travel back to Brassai's Paris. And the only thing I was going to do at the end of the night here was let people know some other things that are going on at the museum. We have a portfolio review day Saturday. Kelly, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Any student or anybody who wants to have their portfolio reviewed is welcome to come. We'll have a few reviewers there ready for any age and any skill level. So come on in, bring in your portfolios. It's open house from 11 to 3. So we welcome you to stop over and see us.
That's great. And we have one more holiday themed workshop coming on December 19th from 1:30 to 3:30. We have winter ornaments inspired by world cultures. So if you're feeling like doing a holiday craft project of some sort, you can come in and join us then. Today, people were making wreaths that were just absolutely beautiful. So we're trying to do the things that we feel we can comfortably do in this pandemic. And I say this over and over again, even if you don't feel comfortable gathering with people, come to the museum because it's better for you than going to the grocery store, and probably safer too. So we're welcoming everyone into the museum. We're having very few programs where we're gathering people. So just coming for a visit to Bastille is something everybody should put on their schedule for the next week. So the show is up until January 30th. So I think, Linda, you were so thorough that nobody had any questions, but we did hear some folks on Facebook as well were chiming in that they learned a lot. A friend of ours, actually a friend of the museum, was on Facebook, who is a photographer, and was saying that he really enjoyed it. So,
well, it was a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay,
Thank you so
well,
much,
say
Linda.
hello to Christopher, and you guys have a good rest of your night. And we'll
Okay.
have to come up with another reason to get you, maybe next time you can actually visit the museum.
Yeah, I want to come in person next time.
All right, take care. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Bye, everybody.